Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get the panel fired up. We appreciate everybody being here. Again, one of the things that Governor DeWine mentioned yesterday was a pilot program, which is an important initiative to try to get students both. We do these. Lucas and I were at OCSS last year. I know Linda was there. And there was an elementary teacher that stood up, and it just broke my heart when she said, you know what? They don't really offer us anything. They tell us to teach reading, to teach math. And we know that we can do more than one thing at a time. So what this is designed to do is both teach literacy as well as history. And I think, obviously I think that's important. We have 4 great, and everyone on the panel today is part of this pilot project, okay? This is being piloted statewide. First, I'm going to introduce Liesl. Liesl, raise your hand. All right. That's Liesl Huneman, who is the Associate Administrator, Office of Literacy at the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. She has been graduated 2011 from Heidelberg University in Tiffin, has a bachelor's in education. She is certified middle school education, language, arts, social studies. She's also certified an intervention specialist for mild to moderate disabilities. 2017, she graduated from Mount St. Joseph in Cincinnati with a master's in reading science and reading endorsement and a dyslexia certificate. Next, Jesse, because they're going to be presenting together. Where are you, Jesse? I'm reading these off the program here. All right. Okay, Jesse. Well, only 5 others, Jesse. Okay. Financial Literacy Social Studies Specialist at the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. Jesse serves as Assistant Administrator in the Office of Academic Success at the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. In addition to championing for integrated model curriculum development, he supports high-quality instruction, professional learning, programming in all content areas. He is passionate about how social studies and inquiry-based learning can create powerful opportunities for students. He holds a master's in curriculum from Western Governors University in American History and Government in Ashland University. He holds a bachelor's in adolescent, young adult integrated social studies from Bowling Green. Rochelle, raise your hand. This is Dr. Rochelle Browning-Halley. She is the Gallia County Local Director of Instructional Services, the Director of Health Services, and a principal at Southern Digital Academy. In Southern Ohio, you wear a lot of hats. Dr. Halley is an experienced educator living in Gallipolis. She holds a Bachelor's of Science from the University of Rio Grande on Comprehensive Communication, Teaching, and Alliances. She serves as the Gallia County Local Director. Her career in education also includes leadership roles in River Valley High School, principal at Hannah Trace. Before becoming an administrator, Dr. Halley was an English teacher at River Valley High School. Professionally, she's a member of Delta Kappa Gamma and Ohio Association of Elementary School Teachers. Beyond her professional work, she is a 4-H volunteer. In the spring, she had the privilege to assist with planning and celebration of the bicentennial of General Lafayette's visit to Gallipolis. There we go. She and her husband Terry are proud parents, daughter of Alicia, and grandparents of 3 grandchildren, and she enjoys reading and traveling. All right, and our final member, in case you didn't figure it out, that would be Lucas. Lucas George is in 8th grade, is in his 8th year of teaching social studies and is currently instructing 8th grade students at Lakeview Junior High in Pickerington, Ohio. He also currently serves as a legislative liaison for the Ohio Council for Social Studies, where he helps consistently advocating for comprehensive, student-centered K-16 social studies curriculum. He has received several accolades through his teaching career, such as a James Madison Fellowship, OCSS Emerging Leader, Gilder Lehrman Teacher of the Year, and the Sons of the American Revolution Teacher of the Year. He's presented numerous times at conferences on topics including simulations, ethnic studies, and AI. The other thing I like about every one of these 4 is they have been in the classroom and they've done the work. And that's really what this is about. So I'm going to turn it over to Liesl and Jesse to kind of get us started and explain what's happening here.
When we were trying to figure out how we were going to talk about our work, we figured we would probably talk about it together. So we're going to do a little back and forth between Jesse and I. So at the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce, our work over the past 5 years has had a high focus on Governor DeWine's Read Ohio initiative. So focusing on dyslexia legislation, the science of reading, professional development legislation, and also focusing on the now 3rd time renewed Ohio's State Plan for Literacy Achievement, which was most recently reviewed and revised in January of 2025. And Jesse and I found ourselves working together a little bit. I'm going to turn it over to Jesse to talk about social studies initiatives.
Yes, thank you, Liesl. So as Liesl mentioned, there was strong foundations for literacy work across the state. The governor also expressed interest in elevating social studies too. And so in 2024, he convened an educator stakeholder group and listened to Ohio's educators talk about teaching social studies, especially in the elementary classroom. And so some of the feedback that we received and heard included some of the things that Paul had mentioned about what are some high quality resources, how to help support curriculum implementation and making sure there's those connections to Ohio and the local communities in which those students attend their schools and they participate in extracurricular activities and also in organizations. And so the governor heard this feedback and tasked and gave us the opportunity to help elevate that high quality social studies within K-12 and even K-16 classrooms as pre-service educators are entering into their careers. And so a part of this feedback was help to form what would then develop and inform that high quality instructional materials list that Liesl is going to share with us.
So another part of legislation that was passed in House Bill 33 was for our pre-K through 5 classrooms for English language arts for high quality instructional materials to be by the department to be reviewed and approved, and then for our schools to adopt those resources for English language arts. A majority of the core curriculum materials that are on our department's approved list are also knowledge building, and so we have a considerable amount of social studies and science content that's built into those high quality instructional materials. And so as we started looking through our list, we started to make connections and see where we could potentially connect both our English language arts and our social studies content, but thinking through how we could do that was what we had to do next.
Yes, and so during the most recent biennial budget, the state legislature gave us appropriated funding to support this integrated model curriculum development, really focusing on elevating literacy, English language arts, social studies, Ohio history, and civics instruction. Thinking about that, we want to explore what can be provided within this integrated model curriculum to make sure that not only you're having those high quality social studies learning experiences, but also using the approved curriculum with fidelity and implementing effectively within the classrooms. And so as we work together as a team at the Department of Education Workforce, thinking about that stakeholder feedback from the educators, thinking about the purpose and the intent of the appropriated funding, we kind of launched our process probably over a year ago. I would say right at the end of the 2024, after the biennial budget was implemented and going through. Excuse me, it's actually 2025. Yeah, correct me. I'm sorry about that. 2025. So this has been a year in the process of making, and so we're going to be proud to say that what you're going to be kind of examining and what you might have already have in front of you is those draft materials for Ohio's integrated model curriculum. We actually just released them on the department's website yesterday, so they are live. We're looking forward to hearing from not only just from the pilot educators and schools that used them this past fall, but also across the state, how these resources and materials, opportunities, and strategies can help elevate that high quality social studies instruction. And so Liesl is going to introduce the available source sets and talk more about them that are included in Ohio's integrated model curriculum.
Oh, perfect. So on this slide, you have listed out all of the source sets that we have. We have 11 source sets. The example source set that we have provided for you today is the one that we do focus a little bit on the Northwest Ordinance, so we thought that this would be a good one to share at this conference. But when we were talking about how to make these connections, we knew that with the requirement of the high quality instructional materials in English language arts and with the $64 million subsidy that was given to schools to purchase those materials, we didn't want to say, and now pick something else. And so we really used the vendors of the high quality instructional materials that were on our approved list, particularly focusing on those knowledge building vendors. And we worked through a request for information process to identify what components of social studies were already showing up in those materials. And then we also did a secondary crosswalk where we identified where social studies skills through the Ohio Social Studies, or the Ohio Learning Standards for Social Studies, were connected to those social studies components built into the knowledge building curriculum. And from there, we identified 11 key areas, which are the source sets that you have listed here on the screen. We did want to make sure we had already been working with Paul as a part of the America 250 Education Committee, and so we wanted to make sure that we especially had a Ohio Icons, the American Story 250 source set, and so that is the one that we are going to be talking about today. Paul, can you go to the next? Thank you. Do you want to flip to the source set slides? For a little bit of background information on what is provided for you in that source set example that you have. So these source sets are created for grades K through 5 and also grade 8. 6 through 7 is an area that we are still trying to make those direct connections as they're focused on Eastern and Western civilization. And so not as direct connections as our K-5 and our 8th grade that focuses on American history. So our draft components are K-5 and grade 8. But our resources, that we've provided are grade banded. So we have K2 materials resources that are connected. We have grades 3 through 5, and then we have a grade 8 set in each of the source sets that are available. And the links are high quality instructional resources that are provided from places such as links from the Ohio Memory through Ohio History Connection. We had a partnership with InfoHio where they also provided links for us to put into this document resource. And then also other Ohio agencies such as ODNR and also our national parks when it comes to some of the more appropriate places for those resources. In addition to the links to the sources, we also have a key vocabulary section where we break down, dependent on the source set and dependent on the social studies topics that are being focused on, we have selected key academic vocabulary for each of those grades. We also have an alignment section for both social studies standards and English language arts standards. And then finally, we also have a section here at the bottom that is for life skills, and that connects directly to the Ohio Means Jobs Readiness Seal. And it allows us to think through what are some skills that our students could be working on as they're working on English language arts and social studies at the same time. You also have opportunities for things such as collaboration, leadership, and those skills are obviously skills that can allow students to build up their way toward college and career. So we wanted to make sure that we had access to those as well.
Thank you, Liesl. So that is really the what is included within a source set in Ohio's integrated model curriculum. The next question we focused on was the how. How would these be used effectively? How these align with the locally prescribed curriculum materials, especially for the core approved lists and instructional materials the department released for schools and districts to review and select from. And then also considering that some schools and districts may departmentalize socialized instruction, how can you help elevate these available resources and supports within a standalone instructional approach? And so part of that implementation experience and the how was to provide sample lessons and kind of examples on how this could be done, both across grade levels and using various types of approved curricula. And so while the department does not endorse a particular curriculum, since schools and districts approve at the local level, we want to still share examples how this could be done. And so on the department's website, we don't have one for you today, but there are sample lessons that are on the Integrated Model Curriculum webpage for schools and districts and educators to review. We also wanted to go ahead.
Let me just say, I know we're throwing a lot at you because there's a lot to this, but we we really are excited about this, and I think you can tell the excitement. Jesse, you about ready to wrap? Because I want to get Rochelle talking about what's happening in schools.
Yes. Yep.
Anything?
We just
You
wanted to
good?
share that there are sample lessons and then also available professional learning that our pilot schools and educators participate in this fall. So those materials and resources are already available or will soon be available on the department's webpage. And so kind of examples about using the Northwest Ordinance are included in those materials.
I just want to add really quick. The lesson that we have up for the Northwest Ordinance is a fourth grade sample lesson plan from CKLA. Again, not endorsed, but happened to be the one that we picked. You will see many sample lessons that are attached to many of the different high quality instructional materials that we have available.
Thanks, guys. Awesome. Rochelle, her district has actually been implementing this. So we're going from here's the state, here's the school, and then finally we got an actual classroom teacher. So Rochelle, take it away.
So I want to give you a little bit of background about our school. We're in Gallia County, southeast Ohio, right across the river from West Virginia. And for years and years and years, we were a balanced literacy district. We not only made sure that students were on reading level at third grade, we had reading levels by the end of each grade, K through 3, that we wanted our students to be on. And balanced literacy is something that you use whole language and some phonics. And we were doing it, and we're showing results. Well, the new curriculum came along, and we went from having schools of excellence, we went from having a national blue ribbon school to students really struggling with the assessments. And we couldn't figure out what was different. And then the more that we examined it, we realized that our students were using, in whole language, use a lot of context clues, you use a lot of pictures, things where maybe you're not really learning the sounds and the words and that kind of thing, and the way your brain works to learn to read. So when COVID hit, once the restrictions were loosened a little by, say, May-ish, we came together in our social distancing room, and we started working on the state literacy grant. And we thought that we would do that with our birth to 5-year-olds. And as we continued that work, we realized that we should also do that with our K to 5. So we applied for 2 grants. We were awarded both grants, but we were still skeptical because we didn't feel that the materials that we were using were going to support the level of rigor that we needed in order to improve what we were doing with reading and just the approach, because everything was going toward the science of reading. We studied the science of reading and really became believers, which was a big deal because, like I said, we were such a balanced literacy district. It was a huge change for our staff because they had bought in and they wanted to know why. And we had to use data and results of what we had been seeing compared to what we had seen in years past to say, there's problems now. What we found was by the time kids were in 4th grade, text became more complex and things like that, so they couldn't rely on context clues as much or pictures, and they had to know how to read the word or they would get stuck and not be able to comprehend what they were reading because they were getting stuck on individual things. Plus, vocabulary was a big problem because when they were coming across unfamiliar terms and things like that, they were spending a ton of time trying to understand what that meant and seeing it for the first time compared to having seen those terms previously. So with the science of reading, there's a lot of information introduced way earlier than what you would teach that, especially in social studies and science. So I know they can't endorse a book, and I'm not necessarily going to, but I'm going to tell you, in those early years, before there was a list from the department, we investigated a couple of different curriculums that we used ed reports to see outside independent researchers had looked at these materials. I believe in my 14 years as curriculum director, we used to, call the when we would do a new book, we would call all the big book companies and have them come in, and they'd show us all the bells and the whistles. Now, we vet the books through ed reports and their lists and things like that before we ever give them to our teachers to help choose. We're choosing social studies right now. That one was a little harder because reading and math have been vetted more highly, like on ed reports at this point, because that's the subjects that's been more concentration. But inquiry-based, we've gone inquiry-based, where students are able to talk about in small groups the information, work through the lessons that they're going to get that day before the teacher ever presents the material, so that they can really make really educated guesses, or share what they're thinking, and it really helps with that rigor. So I believe highly in the high quality instructional materials and making sure that you use that. So we chose CKLA. By Amplify. And what happens is we were getting a new superintendent right when we incorporated CKLA, and he was going in classrooms and he was like, oh my gosh, the first graders were learning all about the circulatory system in their science. Well, they weren't in science, they were in reading. The stories in CKLA are stories that are science and social studies based almost predominantly. So they start getting terms that you might teach. First graders get terms that might be taught in 5th or 6th grade, say in social studies. So when they go to their social studies class later, it's not the first time they've ever heard of something that would have taken a teacher a long time to explain. They already have the basic concept, and that helps greatly. So I gave everybody a paper here, and it's just you don't really have to do a whole lot with it, but I just wanted you to see and understand that with the science of reading, there's 5 pillars, and if you look at those, vocabulary is a big one. That would be important for social studies, like I just said. Also, just being able to fluently read the social studies materials later is, I think, a big deal. So when Paul came and spoke to the superintendent and myself about this pilot project, it was just a given for us, because really our lower grades are already integrated, and they're already working with these things. Our middle school does not have CKLA. They have Springboard, and it's a very good curriculum, but it's not as specific to the integration as the lower grades. So I've been spending a lot of time talking to our 8th grade teachers, because they're just now learning through this project to integrate more. And what they're finding is things like students, we have a writing protocol that we just started this year, where social studies and science teachers do journal writing with their kids based upon what they're learning in the content standards. And they're expected to have journal rights every week, and we follow that data and make sure that's happening. Our 8th grade teachers are saying, after doing some of the things with this pilot project, that vocabulary is showing up in those rights just kind of magnificently. So they said they never would have seen the students use the vocabulary and things that they are now, since they're using the rubrics and the things that through this pilot project. So that's been really good.
Hey, Rochelle, let me jump in too, because I want to talk
Sure.
about one of the other things is, Rochelle is from Gallia Local, and if you're not familiar with that, that is high poverty, rural Southern Ohio. It's a great district, great people, but it's on the Ohio River. So what we're trying to do with this pilot is have students from a variety of different settings, but I'm so proud of the work that they're doing. And we're now going to transition to Lucas, who teaches who's an 8th grade classroom teacher who teaches in Pickerington, which is that what do you call it, Metropolitan?
Sure.
Okay, we're going to call it Metropolitan for lack of better words. Anyhow, Lucas is going to talk a little bit about what the actual classroom experience looks like.
Great, thanks. Thanks for everyone for coming to this session. Who wants to be with those stuffy high school teachers downstairs, right? Up there, they have all this rigor and literacy and deodorant in the high schools. 8th grade, that's where the real magic happens, okay? So thanks for joining me for this. So kind of trying to integrate what I learned in the process of being a pilot teacher into my own classroom as well. So I'm just going to give a little lesson. I know Jesse would if he could, but this is technically isn't ODEW endorsed. So this is just my own lesson right here. I think.
Nice disclaimer.
Yes, exactly. Whenever I start with the Northwest Ordinance, I never want to dive right into the language, okay? You're going to just alienate all your 8th graders right there if you throw out that big document that they give. So I start with a simpler question for them. You are a settler traveling west after the American Revolution. What do you see? And I think that visual is very important for our 8th graders because they're not going to dive right into the language, but I want to see through their eyes what is out west, and I want to see what the starting point is. And thanks to AI technology, sorry if there are any Luddites in the room out there, I do use AI, it's helpful for me to imagine with them. So I wanted to share a few student samples with you guys. The first one here, happy, cheerful, excited. Look at that party going on. That's going to be July 4th, 2026 in Ohio, right, Paul? That's going to be you in the middle? Okay, good. They're excited. They're getting this land. It's awesome. And then we see this one, planes, horses, and settlers. And the conversations in the room, they are brewing with people. But I want to change to this next one right here because already we're going to have a good conversation. Look at what one student put. Land, Native Americans, and space. Oh, there's a difference in the room right now. And not only is there a difference, I want you to look at this next one here. The Native Americans are organized nations. So where does our Northwest Ordinance start off? I think this is the perfect visualizing activity for my students, and it already helps me address some of the conversations in the room. Were there indigenous people in the West? Yes. Were there settlers? Yes. Was there space? Yes. But how do we put all of this together? Now, one thing that I didn't memorize from the curriculum, so Jesse, thanks for sharing with me the curriculum a couple days ago, is this global intercultural fluency piece. The study of the people that live in your community and those that came before can help to build global and intercultural fluency. And just with that small Native American piece right there, we're working towards that. Now, like I said earlier, if you give your students the whole Northwest Ordinance, I'm just speaking from experience here, good luck, okay? You got to break it down a little bit, and I break it down in kind of an interesting way. So Marietta College, they actually pull out some great quotes for us to use here. I do have my students go through the Northwest Ordinance, but this is what we do next. So we have some important quotes here. We have the part about religion. We have the part about habeas corpus. They don't know what that means yet. I have to explain that. The right of trials, religion, morality, and knowledge, the 60,000 inhabitants, and neither slavery nor involuntary servitude. So you guys have seen all these quotes before, and I'm sure you're curious, how do I break it down? I break it down into emojis, okay? And I have them create an emoji based on the different clauses in there. So here are just 3 examples right here. I have the religion one. I have the schools one. They are super excited. I say, guys, without this, we wouldn't be here together. And then they boo me. It's awesome, okay? And then we have the slavery or involuntary servitude one. Now, another student sample right here, which I think is awesome, okay? So for this first one, I have them explain it too. It says, no peaceful person shall be hurt due to their religion. And they put a worship and a peace sign together to illustrate that. The second one, schools and education are encouraged in order to be spread knowledge, morals, and religion, a scholar's cap as an encouraged idea. And then the last one, there should be no slavery in any territory, the chains of slavery being broken. So they took that literacy piece, they analyzed it, and then they created something with this. How do we make learning adaptable and culturally relevant to our students? That's always a question on my mind. And if you look at this piece right here, I think they have a pretty good understanding of those clauses. So that goes into another part of this pilot, oral and written communication, where the integration of social studies instructional strategies with English language arts standards provide opportunities for students to communicate what they have learned and new ideas form based on this information, using both oral and written communication specific to the skills taught per grade level. So I combined that 1787 ordinance with something we talked about earlier, the Land Ordinance of 1785. So students, after they learn about how is government made, how are we going to put this all together, I have them make their own towns based in the layout form of the 1785 Land Ordinance. And my students, I don't know if you can tell, they kind of like to pick on me, okay? So they put stuff I purposely don't like in there. So I had to put a limit on 5 Burger Kings allowed per town, because they know that's my least favorite fast food restaurant. But with this, I have specific spots reserved for schools, the federal government, and they were allowed to create their own towns with all of that information about the 1787 ordinance on the right. So they're integrating both government experience, what they learned in 1787, and how this was a process for getting land and laying it out in the United States. 2-day lesson plan for me, and that's it. That was fun. Thanks.
And again, you can see the magic, and again, I'm a believer in teaching is magic, and you see the magic when it's, when it's done, and that's what's great really about this panel. Now, the timing works out perfect for some questions, so if you have any, isn't it 11:45? I think we're right on schedule. Is that right?
11:33.
Oh, we have more time than I thought. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Then I'm going to do my. I thought I was out of time. Sorry, I've got a smidge myself, and then we'll do questions. Sorry.
And that was a big example of inquiry-based learning. The kids get to, it's not just a teacher lecturing the whole time. They provide information that's necessary, but let the students really think about and dig deeper into what they're talking about. And I think that previously with our old standards and our old assessments, multiple choice, short answers were pretty easy to answer, but now we're trying to, they're trying, whether you like them or whether you don't like the assessments, they're measuring what they're learning with the standards. And I think that students being able to synthesize and analyze is a lot more key, and this type of learning helps them to be able to do that, because they were not able to do it before with just not enough time to use inquiry themselves.
And I think you see that, and I think what Rochelle's talking about is exactly what Lucas incorporates. Again, a good lesson plan, and we've all experienced good teaching and bad teaching. And a good lesson plan, you see those parts in there. And I mean, I'm a little bit biased about this, but I think what the department is doing is setting us on a good course. And again, I think good teachers, like what Rochelle's doing in her district, what Lucas is doing in his classroom, you see that. Now, because I'm Father Time in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about civic engagement and lasting value, because one of the pieces we always talk about is, okay, the Northwest Ordinance was critical in creating civic engagement, but let's talk a little bit about lasting value. And so, first I want to talk a little bit about where I'm from, because I'm also from rural. I always sound from rural. I'm technically from high poverty small town surrounded by high poverty rural. But technically, I'm halfway between Cincinnati, Dayton, and Columbus. So I am from rural. Washington Courthouse is rural southern Ohio. Many of you know where it is. Sometimes it's helpful to see that. But one of the things that we found in our community, and this ties back to the 250, and again, this goes back, at this point, this goes back years. My students were in a cemetery, and we saw this headstone. What do you see? It's broken. All right. It was broken. It is a Revolutionary War veteran's headstone that has been broken. And so my students said, what can we do about this? And what we learned is the United States government, since the 1870s, has been providing veterans headstones at no cost if you can prove two things. you can prove service, and you know where they're buried. Okay? And so what this did is it was a great way to engage. And again, this gets to just exactly what Lucas was talking about, exactly what, this engagement piece. Okay? And so you see my students, and of course, people always like to see them out doing the field work, but the truth is the real work is in the classroom where they're doing the research. They're using the documents. They're filling out the forms. They literally fill out the forms to do this. This is the before and the after. Okay? This is a Revolutionary War soldier, and again, as we were at the 250, this is a Revolutionary War soldier's grave, and if you notice, and this is correct cemetery etiquette, you leave the broken headstone in place. So you do not disturb it because it is in fact an artifact. Okay? But you see the before and the after. The other thing, and again, this gets to what Liesel and Jesse and Rochelle and Lucas are talking about, it also gets to those stories. And one of the stories in my area, the veteran whose headstone this is the grandfather of these two gentlemen who are pioneers in Ohio agriculture. And that's a really fat hog, all right? That is a Poland China, all right? Their family popularized the Poland China breed of hogs, all right? That's a story that's unique to my community. I mean, it's of interest to everybody, but in every community you have those stories, and that's how you want to, that becomes, the headstone becomes the research, which becomes the story. So all of those things are interconnected. And then, again, you can see my students, we kind of took this on the road, and we started doing this. We became experts, and that's the other thing. And again, that's where I love what Lucas is doing. You want the students to be the experts. It's not my job. It's my job to make them the experts. And and you can see my students out in the cemetery again. This is another cemetery. Actually, Stephen is ripped. If you notice the young man, he was the offensive player of the year that year in football. Doesn't hurt to have some big, strong kids in the class. But it really became something, it didn't matter, guys, girls, whatever, and so over a period of time, we were able to research and install 70 headstones for veterans. Mostly were black Civil War veterans who had unmarked graves. We did that one I showed you first was the only Revolutionary War veteran. But it became really a real kind of a mission on our part. And I guess the point is, and in fact, even putting out the flags, these are my high school students doing this. And a lot of times people say, oh, well, you should have elementary students do that. Heck no. All right? Our small cemetery has 1,300 veterans in it. All right, and that's one of the last things my seniors would do before they left is they would go out and put out the flags. All right, because that's and then this is where we talk about civic engagement and lasting value. Most of my students, I started teaching 40 years ago. I entered the classroom 40 years ago this year, so I'm as old as dirt. All right, most of my students have forgotten most of the names and dates that I taught them, but they will never forget the experience that they had working doing this. That is something they will carry with them, I believe, for the rest of their lives. All right? And that's what civic engagement, when we talk about that, that's what it's really about. Now, there's a neat project, again, to tie this back to the 250 and not be too shameless. There's a neat project right now. I'm going to put Lucas to work because he's so talented. Can you pass those cards out?
I think so.
There's a neat project, and it's called the Revolutionary War Veterans Graves Project. And what the Ohio History Connection is doing with the support of the 250 is they would like to, we believe there are 7,000 Revolutionary War veterans buried in the state of Ohio. And what we are trying to do is we are trying to get communities and folks to do this. And in fact, this was and you can go online and it's real time. It's live and real time, which is really cool. And you can see, like, on here, we're showing 3,000 veterans' graves in 1,000 different cemeteries. So technically, that's a little less than halfway to the potential 7,000. Now, Liesel, isn't that also, we also incorporated that as one of the lesson plans, right?
Yes, actually, so thank you, Paul, for providing those materials. We did incorporate, I don't remember which, I believe it was an 8th grade lesson plan that we put it into. But there are some components that are not just because they're aligned to the Ohio learning standards, and also because we wanted to make sure that students had an understanding of their own local communities. We have incorporated many place-based learning components into the source set so that students can make those connections not only to the American history components that are within the social studies and language arts connections in the high quality instructional materials, but that they can make those connections to both Ohio and into their own backyard. And might I add, we also have, since Rochelle's up here on our panel, we tried to add as many different communities into our source sets, and one of our lesson plans is on Gallipolis. And in our local, we have a source set on local communities and how local communities built Ohio. So just want to add that.
And one of the neat things about this project is it's a great way to engage students in this because, again, it's in real time. And we are, again, our goal is all 7,000 of these graves would be on this map. And if you can go to the map and it's real time to see this, which is kind of cool.
Can I add something?
Sure, absolutely.
I'm very
Oh, Mike.
I hardly ever need a mic.
Well,
I like to say my voice carries, not loud. I'm involved with the America 250 grave marking in Ohio. And I want to say to you as teachers, don't be like, oh my God, we can't do this. Because when you open up that survey 123, where you enter the data that you find about the cemeteries and the graves, it's pages long. And it wants to know, is the ground rough around the grave? Can you easily access the grave? I mean, it asks you tons and tons of questions. Don't be afraid. If you don't have all the answers, put in what you know. If you only know it's in Grandview Cemetery and the guy was born and he died and we know he was in the Revolutionary War, put that in. Put in however little information you have and then go for it. If it, it even asks for the GPS location. So I just don't want you to be turned off when you open up Survey 123.
That was a non-paid endorsement for the project. Okay, and again, I'm a big, I feel like pictures tell the story. This is a picture of my students. This tells you everything you need to know. Okay, this is one of my favorite pictures of my students. And again, that's happening. We hear a lot, and there are bad things that happen in schools and things. I don't think we hear enough of these stories. I'm an unabashed cheerleader for education in Ohio, and I will not apologize for that. And when you see teachers like Lucas and what Rochelle's doing in her district, and so I feel very positive about the future of education. It's not perfect. There are things that can be changed and improved, but daggone it, you know what? It's a pretty darn good thing, and I'm proud of it. With that, we are going to do some questions and answers, but I do have to give you a mic if you ask a question. Oh, I'm not going to give you a mic. Elizabeth is going to give you a mic.
First of all, I want to tell you that I'm a retired curriculum director. Boy, do I respect you. Analyzing data, hounding teachers, it doesn't matter, just do it. But anyway, that being said, I also taught reading methods courses for 27 years at Ohio University. So I have to admit, I came in here a bit jaded, thinking, what now? And with balanced literacy, there are a lot of good components. We know that. And I also taught phonics at Ohio University. So it's, I am so happy with what I saw here. This is the right way. And I did not come here looking for you to say the right way. I've been around, obviously look at me, I've been around a long time, I've seen a lot of stuff. I also have lectured across the United States on integrating teaching reading strategies through using social studies, real text, nonfiction, and fiction. integrating it all together. And what I see here is that it's exactly what you guys have in mind, how you're trying to roll this out. Now, my question is, how are you going to get it out there? My career has been spent trying to get it out there and realizing how hard it is. So,
We spent our first year of the grant, the literacy grant, the state literacy grant, using some professional development called Letters. And Letters is, I would equate that to like a methods class that teachers would have learned, had in college to teach reading. Also, the university that's closest to us, the University of Rio Grande, they were part of our professional development, and they have, I believe they've taught all of, redone everything with Letters as well. As a former high school English teacher, I did not learn in college how to teach a student who came to me in high school how to read. Okay? So the other thing that we have done there is we use the Orton-Gilliam framework, and we've taught all of or done professional development with all of our intervention specialists, as well as several others in the district, several English teachers, where we have what we call a linguistics class at the high school level, and actually we do some Orton-Gillingham all the way through. But at the high school, when we end up having kids who are still struggling, really have poor reading skills, we put them in that class. Now, that helps the high school teachers. It's kind of a crash course way of working on that reading. I would say as far as getting, I think I talked a little bit about, well, I know I did with the CKLA and how those materials already incorporate.
what is the name of the program you're saying?
CKLA. It's by Amplify. Uh-huh. It wasn't a well-known company really when we started with it, but much more so now. But CKLA doesn't have the same kind of stories in their books as what we would have grown up with. A lot of it circulatory system, world religions in first grade, compare and contrast. It's not teaching the doctrine, but it's compare and contrast, so they're familiar with terms. So when they get in 5th or 6th grade, I can't remember which grade that they start working on world religion, the students are already familiar with terms like the Koran or a synagogue or things like that. So those materials, which we were very purposeful in selecting, help us with that. And then, like I said, the pilot is kind of extending it through the 8th grade a little more for us. But it's just being very purposeful and not accepting that our kids can't do that, and helping teachers to understand the importance of why we're changing, because I was in, completely entrenched in that. And like I said, I am working in the district that I grew up in. So I taught there. I was principal there at both elementary and high school, as well as now the curriculum director. And we were solid on what we were doing before. And it took a lot of conversations. It took a lot of persuasion to help the teachers understand why, and ultimately sharing that data and showing them why helped. But it's still been a swing, and we still have a ways to go. Our scores aren't still where we want them to be, but we see constant improvement every year. We're seeing growth, which is what we're really focusing on, so much more than what the achievement test score shows. We're looking at the growth of each child, and that's really helping to drive that shift. So
I think putting that data collection in front of the teachers, that was relatively new 20 years ago, to stick it out there. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think that data collection is so important. And when we first introduced that to our teachers, they go, oh, because it's hard. But it makes a difference, and it lets your teachers know that they are the professionals. They look at their data, they make decisions, just like people in industry and business do. And that's huge for your teachers. Good job.
And I just wanted to add, I think you hit it right on the head. the reason that we made sure to connect those high quality instructional materials was that we would have that automatic connection to, with the science of reading professional development legislation, all teachers took some level of the science of reading coursework. And so it wasn't just K-3 teachers who were teaching reading. It was, Lucas took it. Hello, Lucas. But it was social studies teachers, government teachers. And so when you have access to that knowledge, then you can incorporate it into your classrooms and you can see where those connections work. And when we built the source sets, the reason we incorporated both the social studies standards and the English language arts standards is because we might not necessarily be in a social studies classroom, you might be assessing for the social studies understanding, but it's also a writing sample. And so so you really get two components that you're able to score and to see using that data from the student's assessment. How do I further support the students in the classroom?
Thanks for your question. I'll just be honest. I mean, it's tough. Okay, like I try to describe my friends the 100 things I have to do each day, and another thing on a teacher's plate is very daunting for ODEW to put out. Let's just be honest. Okay, you go to a teacher that's overburdened, that might think they know their stuff too, and just like, hey, here's something else. They're going to be like, oh, geez, oh man, okay, I got an IEP meeting in 5 minutes, like I got to go. So what I would really like to see is sample lesson plans from educators in this state. Because a big part of this too is I talked to my English teacher about this, and they don't feel comfortable teaching some historical concepts. They're scared of the follow-up questions that would come after that they don't have the historical literacy for. So what the ODEW I think needs to do is put out sample lesson plans from Ohio teachers that are in the field right now, lead webinars, make teachers feel comfortable with this, and find different ways to integrate this at smaller levels. Because without that, I don't think teachers are going to feel comfortable with that. So this is an ongoing mission, I believe, for this, and I hope they continue to pursue that.
Great, and that's what I love about perspectives on this, great perspectives. Question?
I am a historical interpreter. So my question goes to how are community resources being utilized? Teachers are carrying the heavy load, but how are districts, the state, and individual schools utilizing people in the community, i.e. historic interpreters, i.e. community griots and storytellers, i.e. their local history communities, to help facilitate some of that work? Because it seems like there's a little bit of a division in the community of education when it comes to what teachers have to do based upon their educational standards, and then what we can do in the community. Because unfortunately, you have the kids the time that you have them in the day. Mr. Luru, you are a godsend for taking these kids out and doing this, but there are groups of people within the community who feel that there are barriers into integrating and that work. So what enrichment tools are being utilized, what partnerships are being developed, and how is that being funded so that folks in the community can be stakeholders in the continuing education and citizenship of our young people?
Let me take a first crack at that, and then I'll share with the panel. Great question. And one of the things, and this is an underused resource which we're having today, and those are public historians. Absolutely. And I mean, I think some of the best teachers are public historians. They could be an interpreter. They could be, I said about doing that workshop at Fort Lawrence. One of the best, they had 2 Revolutionary War in period dress. They were, I think, 2 of the more interesting. We had great presenters. Quanta, you were there. I thought they were 2 of the most interesting people there. So we have to do a better job. I think schools, I mean, we always talk about how do we get schools and communities on the same page. It's ongoing work. And it sounds corny to say, well, we need to have partnerships. We do. We have to make those partnerships because there's too many valuable resources, as you say, it's kind of on the sidelines that we need to incorporate.
And we're waiting. Pass us the ball, but who's responsible for facilitating? Who's responsible for facilitating that relationship? People, when I do interpretations, I get, oh, you were great, it's wonderful, my kids would love that, then my phone doesn't ring. But you have $64 million in subsidies to help. How is that's an economic development tool for the kids, for the community, for the public historians. So whose responsibility is it to facilitate that relationship, and how do we do that so that we can take the weight off of our teachers so they can be doing the things that they need to be doing?
And Lisa, I think I'd clarify, the $64 million is for what?
Thank you. I was going to clarify that. The $64 million was specifically for high-quality instructional materials that are on the department's approved list. So you can only use.
That connection is not on that list.
No, this was to get the initial reading project off the ground. This isn't
Yeah.
with a, now what we're talking about, which we want to wrap, is what we're doing here. So that's past, you know what I mean? That was the original to kind of kick off the science of reading. But it's a great question. We need to do a better job. I'll be the first to say we need to do a better job. We got time for, let's get a, yeah, we'll get a,
Can I say something?
oh, absolutely. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Lucas, jump in. And then we'll,
So again, just from a classroom teacher perspective, the biggest barrier is time. Like it is time for putting this stuff into place. Because you can look at what Paul's lesson plan is. That took some time and some patience to do. And I do local history projects in my own classroom as well, and they took like a month to do. So I don't work for ODEW. I'm not a representative of them. I was just part of the curriculum project. In my opinion, we need to get rid of some outdated assessments that we have, and we need instead encourage students to do local history projects and get involved in their community at that end of the year, especially at the 11th and 12th grade level. They want to get involved, they should get involved, and we're putting our time into the wrong places.
and I'll put my State Board of Education hat on for a minute and say, the assessments, those are mandated by the legislature. Those are not mandated by the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. Just saying.
Can
Okay,
I make
we've got-
one comment on this real quick,
Oh, yeah.
too? I know that in our district, we, last year, for example, we had the reenactment of Lafayette returning to Gallipolis with the national tour. It was important for us. I served on that committee, and then I brought the information back to the teachers. I tried to purchase things that would be easy for them to incorporate into their classrooms, some ready-made lessons, some informational packets and things like that. But I went to the meetings. I spent the time working with the committee and the local, the Our House, the French Art Colony, all of those places. And then the teachers could, at their fingertips, had the information. And then our kids attended the event. So they were ready for the event when we got there. But I think you have to have people in your school district willing to be the connection for the teachers to the local historians, and we're trying to do that more and more, but that's just one example of something that we recently did.
And I do want to piggyback on something Lucas said, which I think is right. The classroom today is all about time management. Again, 40 years ago when I entered the classroom, nobody really paid a whole lot of attention, and you kind of did. I had a teacher who did nothing but talk about one thing the whole year. You know, today it's about time management. And so, I mean, you got to be not only a good teacher, but you got to be a smart time manager. And I think, Lucas, I think that's a really good point. I know we got two more questions. Got a question over there and a question up there.
Oh,
Oh.
yes. Do you know, is David McCullough's book, The Pioneers, a required reading for teachers?
It is not.
Why wouldn't it be?
Curriculum in the state of Ohio is a district-by-district decision. In Ohio, we are what's called a local control state. So there are 608, I'm talking about the public districts in Ohio, there's 608 districts. So there is not a state reading list, just like there's no state curriculum.
Okay, well, yesterday, the governor cited that was one of
Yeah,
his
oh, absolutely.
Right, so I mean,
Yeah.
so then my other question is, how closely do you work with the librarians, either at the public level, or if you have a librarian at your school, do you have a section that would be focusing on the Northwest Ordinance for reading, or on any of the books that you're suggesting?
We maintain libraries in our buildings, and we work all the time with the local library. I know our local library brings in a ton of exhibits that our kids attend, that are exhibits that are museum worthy. And all of those materials are there, but we do not have a reading list. And that's probably something that we probably should do a little better with. But we just don't have a list. I don't,
No, I'm just,
yeah.
well,
But we do work with the librarians in our buildings as well as our town, and we have a very, very advanced library in Gallipolis.
and then my last question has to do with term papers. Are those just a dying breed? Children don't do them anymore? And the reason I'm asking is that if it's so focused on time management, if it's so focused on getting the work done, and the idea of, the emoji concept you came up is very clever, but the actual idea of like writing a book like David McCullough, the best part of his book is the bibliography, is all the original research. And so if children don't learn how to do that, and they don't have to read 5 books, for their sources, I'm just worried that they're not being able to do complex problems. And that's what the Amazons and Googles that want to hire people are going to be able to solve.
Great question. We do have research standards that are in all of the grade levels for within the writing strand of the English language arts standards. And then in addition to that, we also have a set of standards that are for skill-specific, social studies being one of the call-out areas where English language arts can be incorporated into social studies through those research prompts. So research papers do still happen. There are a variety of writing types that are happening within the high-quality instructional materials. It's often directly connected to something that they have read within that class, or potentially that is a starting point, and then students are adding additional research components onto it.
We have 2 more questions, and then as any good person, I will get you out a little bit early for lunch. You're going to be our last question.
Hi. My question is from the other side, as someone who has worked in libraries and archives, public history, local history sites. Like, what is one thing we could do very concretely? Because I think we've worked in places where we want people to come, we want people to engage in our resources, right? And that engagement, like, is there a concrete thing that you've been wishing that your local folks would do, running the local history museum, running the historical site, running the archive, that would actually make educators' lives easier and more likely to engage with our resources?
We'll let Lucas take the first bite at that.
In a technological age, I think a lot of people get nervous about AI, about people being on their screens, about technology replacing teachers. I think students are always going to crave interacting with humanity and interacting with people. And I think the best way to do that, as Paul showed earlier and as I've done my own classes, is through local history. What happened like right down the street? So what I would like to see is if there was a program or something where I could reach out to a library and archivist and be like, hey, I'm teaching the Civil War coming up here soon. Are there any programs or information you can give me about Civil War veterans that were within this area around here? Or American Revolution veterans, or settlers, or people, or indigenous nations as well. If you guys could provide that for me and give me primary sources and resources, I know a ton of teachers that would use that stuff. It's just very daunting for us to try to look for that information and meet our curriculum needs at the same time.
Good question. Rochelle?
I would say something that comes to mind with that is we have a district, and it's just a touching on it, but giving them the experience. We have a district field trip list that is very specifically made to where we look at mostly at social studies standards and try to match the trips that students take at each grade level with those standards. The libraries are obviously included. We have a John G. Black History Museum in our town. We have a railroad freight museum in our town. Going places to the Robert Byrd locks and dams. There's all kinds of things that they can see there. So we try to be very strategic in where we send kids. 8th grade goes to Tecumseh every single year. So these kids get from K to 8, for sure, they get these experiences that are kind of purposefully connected to a lot of these places in our area. So that's just a surface sort of experience, but at least they get get to experience that place is there, what they do, how they could, use the resources there. And we constantly work with our local library. I mean, whether they have a speaker series where they bring speakers to our high schools and middle schools, and then we also, like I said, go to right now they're having traveling blocks at our library, which is Legos that are made, and each Lego set is made out of different ways over time that people would travel. So our kids will be going to that. We've done the one with the bodies and the animals, and a lot of really big exhibits. So we try really hard to connect with those people. I was just at a meeting a couple nights ago where the Lafayette Committee had won an award, and the speaker there was the curator at the John G. Center, and she has a lot of projects that I think our school could focus on, so I'm going to start talking to her and working on that. So I think it's a matter of not laying all of that on the teachers, but trying to find ways for the teachers to be able to easily access those places and giving them information that they don't have to go dig for, if at all possible.
We do have, I know Jesse briefly mentioned it when we were talking about the source sets. We do have some professional learning that is coming out, hopefully this summer, maybe into the early fall, that we are contracting out. And some of that work is also, it's going through how to use the integrated model curriculum, how to incorporate and implement it within your schools. And one of the components that we've included in that is reaching out to your local community historian and making those connections. So I think that would be a great place for us to kind of bolster that as we're working on that professional learning. I know as we were going through the pilot, we have obviously teachers that were in the pilot, but we also included curriculum directors, and so we want to make sure that as we're going through our finalization of these materials, that we're really giving access to anyone who would be really touching a social studies classroom, and so that would be a great place to incorporate it.
Last question, up here. Is it short?
Thank you. I think my question is, my curiosity has changed definitely since I came into this room. And like Paul, doing like more than project-based learning, you're doing something that's going to be left for generations. Lucas, how you just like, yeah, you opened my mind about AI a little, but how my heart is with middle school as well. And Rochelle, talking about like how are we leaving, like building vocabulary. I think my question has completely changed, like how, with this new thoughts, what we're leaving. We'll all be in one of these graves one day, right? What is the heart of, how do we, you won't have enough time, right? But how do we leave those little seeds that give grace and courage to our young people who are going to be leading us and taking care of us, to have their own thoughts and to feel confident, and even to go home in their own homes, in their community, walking in the streets today, and feel safe, and feel valued, and feel like that they want to do more than us. We want more. We always want more for our kids than we have for ourselves. So how do we do that?
Great question. I'll go to the panel on that. Anybody? Lucas? Jesse? Jesse, you've been quiet.
I think your question kind of hints at what Paul was talking about, the importance of civic engagement and lasting value. I think that really, to me personally, like individually, not anything else, like that's what speaks to the heart of this integrated model curriculum, is that you can create those moments where your students, your educators, and even your administrators and your school community can all come together and explore those thoughtful questions, thought-provoking questions, and help develop productive dialogue around those things. Research has suggested that when students or individuals study their local communities, they learn more about it, they build more civic pride and civic engagement because they're invested in it. And so I think coming back to like the why of Ohio's integrated model curriculum is really to help cultivate that environment using high quality instructional materials and resources, using evidence-based and research-based practices, but then also adding the layer of authentic assessment. So not only where students are doing the reading, writing, thinking, and speaking that show up in English language arts, but how do you build that impact into your local community, into where students can take that and make something like the Graves Project a continuing existence. I think lastly too, it's also just not about what was then, but also what is now. I think the semi-quincentennial celebrations remind us to what is around us currently. I just read an article recently too that the recently elected mayor of East Cleveland's grandfather was Garrett Morgan, who is the inventor of the stoplight in Cleveland. Like that is the now. And I think to me, that is where it's an opportunity for our public historians and local communities to kind of rally together and talk about what's occurring now too in their community, like buildings that are changing, new infrastructures, new monuments, memorials. How can those be commemorated, remembered, and how those understandings are changing to how they were before, how they are now, and what they can be in the future. I think that's where we can leverage that start small of the Ohio's integrated model curriculum, whether if it's a source set resource that's included or one that you find from your local community or local historical society, or even a statewide museum like the Ohio History Connection or COSI too. Starting that small, introducing that one source, that one opportunity, and then just building from there up to scale where every educator is empowered to create those opportunities in their classrooms and supported by their school districts, their professional learning teams, and on a, from the state level too, there is that support, that encouragement, and the opportunity.
I got another question. I want to get a question in here. Lucas, you can answer. I don't even know what the question is, and you can answer it.
Students need to take ownership over their learning.
There you go.
Students need to take ownership over their learning.
Okay.
I went through that whole lesson. I didn't think I said I lectured or I force-fed them. They created everything. They are going to be in the driver's seat of our history one day, and they need to learn how to take ownership now.
Well said.
Just one last quick question. So this is from kind of a follow-on to your previous question. From a historical society perspective, I'm on 2 historical societies in the Dayton area, and we're trying to refresh our relationship with the community, including the schools, right? And so we're just really getting started, and I'm wondering if there's like, do we know of some location that does this really well between the historical society and the education system that we could go benchmark and say, you know, how did you start that relationship? How do you continue that relationship? And, you know, how can we leverage what you've already done rather than trying to figure it out on our own? Does anybody have any ideas?
Great question.
I am a retired docent from the Ross County Historical Society Museum. Ross County Historical Society and Museum in Chillicothe, Ohio. Yes. I'm a retired docent. In the month of May, twice a day, we have school buses pulling up to the school, and we are conducting classes through, and we are taking those children from Ice Age, mound builders, the founding of Chillicothe, Civil War, Camp Sherman, all the way up to Erie Canal, trains coming to the town, and the growth within. And so, Ross County Historical Society, Chillicothe, Ohio.
Gene, do you have a question? I'm going to go to my friend Gene. And this is the last.
No, I think we talk about the downsides. We heard lots of stories about slavery and different ones coming out, but I see so many people in Washington County that were black and they served in the American Revolution. They came into Ohio, they settled, their grandsons are famous people here in Ohio today. I see a black man from Blennerhassett Island escaped, came across the river just 5 miles up the road and lived till he was 115. and he was written up regularly in the newspaper. There are so many success stories that there's more than slavery, there's more than the Indian removal. We had Native Americans came with the troops to Marietta because they were friends, acquired land, helped bring back captured people that the Indians captured, took to northern Ohio, and then were forced to leave the area because they were afraid of the Indians themselves, even though they were one. But so I think just add into the conversations the good stories.
Absolutely. And I'm going to leave you with one last thought, and then I really am going to let you go. I stole this from somebody at iCivics. Excuse me, I borrowed this. If you are in kindergarten right now, in 13 years, it will be the 250 of the U.S. Constitution. So what's really happening is this is a starting point, not an ending point. And it's exciting to me that Lucas is still going to be in the classroom, I hope. So, I mean, that's where it's about. So it's really about, and so this is really a place to kind of start. So the 250 gives us a great place to start, but we're not at the end. We're really at the beginning. I want to thank my panelists, and I want to thank you. This was a great conversation, one of the best. Thank you. I think